There are walls in this world that cannot be crossed. There is no force so great, nor light so harsh, nor sound so loud as to penetrate them. These walls are hidden from us, and we may go our entire life not realizing what secret places we are forbidden to enter. How can one know about such walls that cannot be seen or felt? There are secret places where the walls are stretched thin, where it's no longer clear which side is which. Places where things that do not belong to our world slip in without notice. Places where one of us can disappear and never find our way back again. I know, because I found such a place 2 nights ago. Like most things, it began with a girl. I would have killed for her, and I wish that she knew it. She was my classmate during my senior year at university. I didn't know what love was supposed to feel like, but she burned a hole in my awareness that left little room for anything beside. Her slightest murmur drowned out the surrounding noise. The barest turning of her head in my direction caused all other motion to cease. I remember how the half-dozen words we shared played on repeat for the rest of the day, and by the time I lay down to sleep that night, burning from the flesh of my own thoughts, I knew that I was lost. As the semester progressed, we grew closer than I dared hoped possible, but I was a fool to think I was the only one to notice her grace. Of course, she was already engaged to marry, and I accepted that it was my role to only admire her from a distance. The wedding was fast approaching, though, and I couldn't bear the thought of us going our separate ways in life without her ever knowing how much better my world was with her in it. I began to fantasize about situations where her fiancé humiliated himself in some impossible competition between us. I dreamt about making some grand romantic gesture that I lacked the courage to even whisper aloud. Each dream grew more vivid and elaborate, distracting me from the ache of jealous desperation that I could never bury deep enough to forget. Then came the night before her wedding, the night she kissed me on the cheek and thanked me for being her friend. I couldn't sit still, couldn't hear myself think over the pulse of my own frustrated desire. Sweating, miserable, anxious without relief, I forced myself to go for a walk to clear my head of her. Past unfamiliar streets, down unknown roads, I walked so far that I left the city lights behind and found myself amidst the slouching ruin of long abandoned houses. I'd been walking for hours, but I hadn't succeeded in leaving her behind. I sat down beside an old, boarded-up well to rest. I noticed a small hole between the planks, large enough to fit a coin through. Fishing around in my pocket, I found some loose change to drop through the opening, wishing myself happiness and a life without her. And wishing her the best, even if that meant a life without me. I didn't expect there to still be water in the well. But it wasn't the plopping of my coins that surprised me. It was the rattle of something underneath the boards, and the quarter which slipped out from the hole to roll at my side. I thought it must have hit a rock and bounced back up at me somehow for a moment, but that moment ended when I heard a voice echoing from below. "Hello? Is there someone down there?" "Do you mean up here?" I called back. "Are you stuck in the well?" "What are you talking about? You're the one in the well." The only thing that made sense to me was that someone was trapped in there, all the same. I worked at one of the planks until I could get it loose, flinging it aside to get a proper look below. There wasn't anyone there, though. Nothing but the dark water and my reflection peering into it. Then I watched as my reflection dropped another coin. The spinning metal hit the water on his side. then continued falling upwards until it rattled on the bottom of one of the remaining boards. The two of us were identical, right down to the clothes we were wearing and the smudge of lipstick on our cheeks. That stood out to me the most. And on impulse, I asked him if he were here because of her. He said yes, and in the moment, I knew the two of us were living exactly the same life. Only we were living in the different worlds, not knowing the other existed until that very moment. There are a million things we might have said to the other in such a circumstance, but the two of us knew, without words, that she was the only thing on our mind. It felt so good to finally admit my feelings openly to the only person who could completely understand. We both shared the same hopes and fears and sullen depression as we accepted our fates. But I was the one who figured out what had to be done. If we don't tell her, we'll always wonder what could have been, I said. But if we do, we might ruin her own shot at being happy, or lose her forever as a friend. The only way we won't always wonder is for the two of us to each do something different. We'll flip a coin, he said. He must have liked the idea for me to say it. Heads, you tell her and I don't. Tails, you tell her, and we'll meet back here tomorrow night to tell the other how it went. He flipped the coin down to the water, and it kept flipping, all the way until it got to me. I snatched it out of the air and slapped it against my wrist, and the other me and I locked eyes. I'm scared, he said, but he was smiling. Heads, I'm going to tell her, I said, showing him the coin. His smile broadened, and I could easily imagine how relieved he must have felt. I was terrified, and he knew it. And somehow, that made it all okay. Do it in person, he told me. Don't hold anything back. Make it count. I really hope it works out for you. I hope it works out for us. I told her I loved her. It was after 2 a.m. by the time I got back home. Almost 3 by the time I got to her place. I didn't text or call. I just knocked on the door. I was so occupied rehearsing everything I might say that I didn't even realize how freaked out she must have been to hear someone knocking at that time. I almost ran away right then, but I held my ground until she opened the door. She leaned against the frame with a smug curiosity, wearing nothing but her underwear and a baggy t-shirt. All the words I prepared dissolved like mist. So before she asked me a question I couldn't answer, I just blurted it out. I told her I loved her and that it was the will of the universe that she should hear it from me tonight. For the second time that night, she kissed me, and the universe rejoiced with me. We stayed up all night talking, and she didn't get married the next day. She said she'd suspected the truth, but hadn't trusted the feeling enough until I had the courage to come to her door. She told me she was so happy that I told her in time. I asked her what she would have done if I'd waited until after she was married to tell her. She shook her head and wouldn't say, and I knew the answer hurt her too much to try and pry. She was going to have a hard enough time explaining her change of heart, and I promised to be respectful and not rush her in any way. We spent all the next day together, and I was so deliriously happy that discovering a parallel dimension only seemed like the second most magical thing to happen. That night, I drove out past where the city lights dried up to the boarded-up well. I couldn't wait to tell the other me the good news. He started laughing when I told him. Then both of us were laughing without quite knowing why. He made me tell him every detail of what I said and did and how she reacted, and I told him everything. Everything except when I asked her what would have happened if I'd waited one more day. I wanted the other me to be as happy as I was, and I couldn't bear to steal the joy from our eyes. We made a promise to return the next night, and I did. The next time I looked into the dark water, he wasn't there yet, though. And I saw nothing where my reflection should have been peering over the lip of the well. I sat with my back against the stone and waited for him a long time before I finally heard his voice. "I kissed her," he said. I jumped up and peered over the rim of the well. I was sure I heard him, but I still couldn't see any reflection on the other side. "She didn't kiss me back," he said. "I didn't catch up with her until she was in the train station. They were going to their honeymoon upstate, and I managed to get her alone, and I kissed her. She said we would have to talk about this when she got back. I told her I loved her, and she pushed me away." The voice sounded different than I remembered it. There wasn't as much of an echo to it, and it took me longer than it should have to figure out why. I didn't realize what had happened until a heavy blow beat against the underside of the old boards. He'd gone through the water and climbed up to my side of the well. "Why should you get her, and I don't? This isn't right," he said. "We flipped a coin. We had a deal." "You cheated." Part of the old wood ripped away in his hand. He was bracing with his back and legs against the side of the well to stay in place, while his hands were free to widen the opening. "How did I cheat? I didn't stop you from telling her." "You did. I might have told her myself if you hadn't stopped me. This is your fault." Beating on the decaying barrier, the pounding sound frightened a flock of settling birds nearby, and they all went up in a frightened rush. My heart was running wild with panic. I couldn't fully process what was going on. All I knew is that I couldn't let him get above the rim of the well, that if we were both here on one side, then I wouldn't need to be physically attacked to suffer for it. I wouldn't be myself. My life wouldn't be my own if he and I stood on equal ground. That's why I grabbed a piece of broken wood and brought it down on his head. I didn't know I was going to do it before it happened, and he looked just as surprised as I was. The blow was enough to make him slip and tumble back towards the water. He fell straight through, but he caught himself on the other side. Through the water, he stared up at me. Blood from the gash across his hairline dribbling down his face. What could I do? I couldn't leave the well to find something to seal it up with, not without giving him time to escape. I couldn't stand there forever and wait for him to try and crawl back up. I couldn't do that. I couldn't go down into his world and let him live in mine, not without losing her. All I know is that I shouldn't have done what I did. I should have turned and ran to my car. I shouldn't have given him the chance to escape into my world, because I know that's what I would have done. I would have killed for her. And so will he. He knows where I work. He knows where I sleep. He knows everything about me. And if I were to disappear, he could take my place and no one would ever know. Lauren Daniels, you need to know. That's why I'm writing this down. If you read this, you'll know to ask me about the well. I'll tell you the truth if you do, but if you ask him and he pretends that he doesn't know, then love him all the same. This is proof that neither of us could live in a world without you. There's always been this strange energy that follows me. It's been there for as long as I can remember, and I grew up with its presence, always lurking around me. When I was a child, it seemed to come around more and more. My parents always put off my fears as childlike imagination, when really, it was more than that. My parents moved into our house in a smaller city outside of Boston just before I was born. The house was fairly new, and there had been no reports of deaths or foul play inside of the house before they bought it. To this day, my mom tells me that she's not seen or heard anything paranormal in the almost 20 years that we've owned the house. I, however, speak very differently on that matter. I had a room to myself in the house and was terrified to sleep alone. My bedroom was in the far right corner of the room, up against the wall, with my dresser next to me and my closet a few feet away. Every night as I tried to fall asleep, I would see a pair of yellow, glowing eyes peering out from behind the dresser. I would become paralyzed with fear and just stare at them for minutes on end, not moving an inch in fear that it would attack. Soon enough, it would recede back and disappear behind the dresser. There were multiple instances where I would awake to see a tall, shadowy figure with red glowing eyes standing in my open closet, even though I was sure to close that closet door every single night. When I told my parents about these happenings, they again blamed it on my active imagination or things that I may have seen on TV. As years went on, the figures would appear more frequently. The Shadow Man, as I would call him for now, would seem to get closer to me every single night. One night I woke to find him sitting on the edge of my bed, staring me down and not moving an inch. These instances eventually got so bad that I couldn't sleep alone, and I had to move into my sister's room for many years. Once I did, these figures appeared a lot less, and for many years, I thought I was safe. When I was around 10 or 11, my mom and I came home to see my dad's car parked in the driveway. This was unusual, since my parents had been divorced for a few years, and my dad would only come by when it was his day to have us over, as per the custody agreement. My mom and I walked inside and found my dad and my sister distraught and bawling her eyes out. She explained that while she was home alone, watching TV, she heard footsteps coming from upstairs. Particularly, footsteps coming from my room, and down the hall to my mom's room, and then a door closing. She had hid in the bathroom and called my dad for help, all while still hearing the footsteps upstairs. My dad had checked every room and swept the perimeter of the house and the basement to see if there was any sign of a break-in, and there wasn't. This was odd, since the only way someone could break in was either through the basement and garage, which was always kept locked. The front door, which my sister would have seen someone come in, or through having a ladder and smashing an upstairs window to get in. Again, there was no trace of a break-in, but my sister still swore that she heard footsteps. Every day after I got out of school, I would be home alone since both my parents worked full-time, and every day after that incident, I would hear the footsteps upstairs. Sometimes I could even hear someone coming down the stairs, and I would lock myself in the bathroom and call my parents in hysterics. To this day, I tell them that those footsteps were real, and I'm still not believed. These occurrences were around the time that my grandfather had died. My dad did not allow my sister and I to see him on his last days since he thought it would be too painful for us. I did, however, attend his funeral, and the entire time I did not cry. My grandfather was abusive towards me and caused me a lot of trauma. In the last few years of his life, he formed dementia, the kind that makes you angry for the littlest things. He was not a happy person and would take his anger out on me, but that's not the reason I didn't cry. When they were lowering his casket into the ground, my grandfather was in tears and I was right beside him, holding his hand. but behind the casket, right next to a tree, was my grandfather, alive and healthy. Only he looked a little strange. His eyes were very dark, and there were those deep purple gashes on his skin that oozed green liquid. He smiled at me and muttered something in Portuguese that loosely translates to, "Let's hope that you aren't next, little girl." A few weeks later, my family and I went to my grandparents' house to help clean up his things. My 3 cousins, who were all boys, wanted to go down to the cellar, where my grandfather spent most of his time in the apartment below, and take pictures to remember what things looked like. They were ahead of me, but as I walked down those cellar steps, I got a bad feeling in my gut. I turned around immediately and ran up the stairs, closing the door behind me. A few minutes later, they came running back up in a panic. When I asked them what was wrong, one of my cousins pulled out his iPod and showed me a picture that still haunts me to this day. It's a photo of the living room of the apartment, but in the wood of the wall was my grandfather's face, smiling directly into the camera. And on the couch beside it, a black outline of my grandfather. I thought for many years that this thing that follows me could be the spirit of my grandfather, but that wouldn't explain all the things I saw in my bedroom years before his death. I did some research and came up with another theory that it might have been a spirit, just taking his form to scare me. I was a bit skeptical of it all until recently. I'd gotten used to seeing and hearing things around me, even outside of my house. There were a few times where I would see shadow figures in the lining of the forest as I drove by. One time, my friend and I had witnessed a white figure scurry by from my bathroom to my dining room while we were in the kitchen late at night. All this I'd come to accept, until I had my first encounter with a Ouija board. It was my senior year of high school, and I was hosting a casual party at my house since I'd just performed the last high school production I would be in. My friend Emma had bought a Ouija board for fun, since I had claimed that my house was haunted. We fucked around with it for about an hour, asking spirits if we would ever be rich and famous, until we came across one spirit. We asked if it was a bad spirit, and the planchette had moved right to yes. Then, out of sheer stupidity, we asked if it wanted to hurt us, and it went to yes. We immediately said goodbye to the spirit and took a moment to collect ourselves. We all swore that no one was moving it, and even if someone was, we would be able to feel it. We tried again and came into contact with a friendly spirit. This would start some of the wildest few hours of my life. I was playing with 2 of my friends, Colin and Kayla. The answers the spirit gave us were only catered towards us 3. At first, we asked it simple questions. It was a good spirit that did not want to do us any harm. After a few minutes, we asked if it was okay for us to leave, and it went straight to no. We asked it why, and it spelled out the word message. For who? Colin. We all looked at each other and wondered if we should go on. But at this point, Colin was determined to get answers. He asked, "What message do you have for me?" It spelled out the words Messiah. Who told you I was the Messiah? After a few hours of questioning, we found out some unsettling information. A demon named Evo was going to attack Colin on May 15th at 5 p.m. We did our research on this demon, and it was one of the worst and most evil ones. Every time we asked it to say goodbye, it would say no. It wasn't until hours later that we finally said goodbye to the spirit and parted ways. When May 15th came around, nothing happened to Colin. We all joked about it, saying that he was going to die, but it never happened. I thought that all of this spirit stuff was bullshit and decided to test the Ouija board again, this time with a different group of friends. My friends did not seem very into it, and only one of them would play with me. And there were a few points where I was playing with only my fingers on the planchette. I ended up connecting with the same spirit that had delivered the message to Colin, but this time the spirit was very short with me. Evo was coming after me now. On June 6th at 3 o'clock. Now the spirit didn't describe whether it was AM or PM, so I was not sure which to expect. I figured that this demon would have the decency to haunt me during the hours that I was awake, but that was not the case. I went to bed on that night expecting to sleep soundly, which I had. I opened my eyes and was confused to see that it was still dark in my room. I was sure that I had slept a full night, but I had awoke with my body rigid and unable to move. In the corner of my room, right next to the door, was the same dark, shadowy figure with red eyes that I had seen in my childhood. It had looked closer and closer with every second. I thought for sure that this was it. That spirit had been right, and Colin was just a setup. I couldn't close my eyes or move, so I just stared at it. It got to the foot of my bed, when suddenly, a white light appeared from above me. It came down and over the shadow figure and consumed it in light, making both of them disappear in a flash. My body became lax and I could move again. I still can't explain to this day. I know the demon, or whatever it is, could still be there. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, and at night I can hear footsteps around my room or knocks on 3 of my walls. I will keep you updated if anything else happens to me, but things have been oddly quiet for a while.
This is not a confession. I have not committed any wrongdoings, nor do I have any remorse over my actions. I believe when the board has revised my report, they will see my work has been justified. The first subject was a 12-year-old boy living near the border. He was taken while he was asleep. We brought him to our facility in the desert, where we began our project. Over the next 10 years, we would perform over 300 experiments. The subject's body was exposed to viral infections, which we would then treat. We also tested the limits of body modifications and organ removal. At the end of the 10-year period, the subject's body was left unrecognizable as human. Much of his skin had been removed by the skin infections. We had removed his vocal cords early on, as the screaming was harming his pH level. We transplanted various animal body parts throughout his body, but almost all failed. Eyes seemed to grow well in the stomach region, though. Disease caused them to mutate, but it was a minor issue. Phase 1 was a success. New subjects were brought in. Subject 1's family was chosen. With 16 subjects, we had much more freedom, extended sensory deprivation, radiation exposure, skin removal, face transplants, vivisection. Subject 15 was a highlight. Over the course of a year, we removed her hands, legs, eyes, tongue, teeth, nose, ears, 1 lung, digestive system, genitals, and skin. She would still respond to stimuli. We performed brain surgery on her 17 times till she stopped responding. Another highlight was her brother. Most subjects would lose regular mental capacity within a year. Subject 13 was an exception. He would not change his patterns nor submit to the experiments long after the others broke. The subject's treatment was genital removal, heavy trauma, and 3rd-degree burns. He was interesting. 6 weeks later, I determined we had learned enough. We freed the subjects to return home. Subjects 1 through 8 died immediately from exposure to air. Subjects 9 through 12 disemboweled themselves. Subject 13 stared at me for a day. He killed his limbless sister before walking off into the trees. Phase 2 was a success. In conclusion, you can see there was no incompetency in my management of the Humanity Project. I recommend reopening the program and expanding it. A third phase, the widest, with a focus on eugenics and breeding over the course of multiple generations. Signed, Dr. Bobo. End. I discovered this document 2 months ago. I brought it to media attention, but within a week the government shut me down. They called me a hoax. There is no such thing. There is no doctor named Bobo. There was never a Humanity Project. I thought it was a cover-up, but I changed my mind recently. People are seeing horrible things in the trees. Tall men peering at us over the trees. They grin at us. I wonder when the third phase will start.